with API security?
Good advice is to add API-specific developer training for your developers so they learn how to develop source code.
I like that. All right, JJ, I'm going to you. Do the opposite. Give me some bad advice on dealing with API security.
So, in order to ensure velocity for the business, don't put access controls on your APIs.
Oh, that's pretty horrible. One up that, Carl. Give me some worse advice.
Worst advice, set a timing mechanism so that API call responses only happen between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m. So that when your sensitive data is outbound, it happens in the middle of the night. And we all know that hackers aren't working in the middle of the night.
Good point. Let's begin.
Get ready. It's Super Cyber Friday.
Hey, welcome everybody. It is Super Cyber Friday. Today's topic is hacking API security, an hour of critical thinking on protecting the conduits of corporate data. And our guests today, you just saw them, and you're going to hear them for the next hour, is JJ Aga. He's the CISO of Compass, and also Carl Matson, who's the CISO of No Name Security. Hey, guess what? No Name is sponsoring this very event. So thank you, No Name, for sponsoring. We greatly appreciate it. Hey, 7 different ways to participate. You know what it is. So here's the bad idea. How not to secure an API. I'm sure there's a lot of really bad ways to do it. And let's get your 10% tips on how to improve API security. I challenge you to give me more good ideas than bad ideas. I know it won't happen, but I still challenge you. Excuse me. All right, you can vote in the polls. Join us on video. Not many people take advantage of this. Go ahead. If you got a question or comment, just say, bring me on. We'll try to bring you on video. And ask a question anytime or vote for your favorite question. Yes, we want questions. Please send those in. All right, today's schedule, you'll see we have the good ideas, bad ideas. We'll play the public interest. How not to, we'll put the polls up. We'll play the Department of Yes, and we'll have plenty of questions. And then we will do our meetup at the end of the show. Please stick around for our meetup at the end of the show. We want you to be a part of that. It's a lot of fun. I know many of you are thinking, oh, well, I don't know that much about cybersecurity. I'm not a CISO. You need to come and join us. Please come and join us. We want you there, especially if you're new. And if you're new, participate in the chat room, okay? We have a lot of the regulars are participating. We love that, but we want some new people too. Hey, guess what? There's a link at the bottom of the screen as well for next week's event, which is Hacking DDoS Trends. That's November 4th, 2022. Guess what? If you click that link, you can register for next week's event. It will not take you out of this event. You'll still be in it, and you can register for next week's event. The reason you want to do that is you're automatically entered in a raffle to win a CISO Series jacket. And I'm going to say congrats to our winner, but he has not responded. He won a jacket. Joe Bianco of Launch Darkly, he's won a jacket, and I pinged him, and he has not responded yet. So he needs to respond to get his jacket. All right, let's start the show. Well, we have started the show, but let's start our conversation here about API security. Now, we did this very topic 2 years ago, Carl. And so let's just do a quick reflection. Rather than doing the sort of the 101 in API security, what do you think has been the biggest change, pro or con, in API security in the last 2 years?
Well, I think the biggest change is that everybody is using APIs to generate new revenue streams, and that used to be the thing that tech companies did, like Okta and Salesforce, for example. And now everybody's in the API business: mortgages, insurance, pharmaceuticals. And so what we're seeing is the API economy really taking flight in really every industry vertical. So quantitatively, it's a very different story from 2 years ago. Even though API security risk is largely it's the same chess game.
What about you, JJ? What have you seen as the biggest change? Is it just more, like Carl says?
I think it's more, and Carl and I were having a conversation. It's partly the democratization of how APIs are now being published. You're seeing a lot of these new services, whether it's the low code solutions where they're kind of putting APIs at the fingertips of everyone, whether they're in finance or your HR team. And so your surface area that you might have with a normal gateway no longer exists. And so you're still dealing with the asset management and the enumeration challenges that do exist with any security challenge. But this is just compounded with velocity of the organization and kind of how fast things do publish and iterate.
All right, we're going to get maybe a little into the weeds here with Dustin Sachs' question just came in. I'm going to throw this one to you, Carl, and actually I want both your answers. What do you think is the one thing most security practitioners are not paying attention to regarding API that they really should be? So the big thing that they're missing.
Uh, every control framework in the world always starts with asset discovery and asset inventory. And I'd say that it's very rare that an organization has a complete and accurate API asset inventory. And so all other things aside, whether it's source code training, whether it's runtime prevention, without that fundamental first building block of asset inventory really nailed, everything else is sort of a luxury item.
That's a good point. Would you agree with that, or would you say there's one other? I mean, yeah, I mean, we always talk about this. Like, you really can't take the second step until you know what your asset inventory is, and we also know it's on the C. Why am I forgetting the C whatever controls? Why am I blanking?
CIS.
CIS. Thank you. CIS controls. What would you say, JJ?
I mean, I agree with Carl, right? It starts with asset management, but I would double click just into that where it's partly business logic. And so when you're looking at how these APIs are actually used, yes, they will respond with whatever JSON payload it is, but should that actually be part of the attributes part of the schema that actually is being delivered? Does it make sense for this API to be responding with an SSN number? Those are the things that while and you can enumerate the endpoints, when you actually see the response of it and how you actually interact with it, those are where you could really start tightening the controls out when you're actually applying business logic to your API security.
All right, I want to just say that some of the bad ideas that come in. David Peach's bad one here: don't document your APIs. That way the bad guys can't figure out how to hack them. Seems logical to me.
It's a great idea.
It's
Love that.
awesome. And Dustin Sachs already with 10% better tips. Ensure that your APIs are secured. And that, by the way, we're going to get into that because that's a pretty big topic. But an access to run is based on least privilege. So let's double click on Dustin's comment there. The ensure that your APIs are secured is kind of a very big topic, Carl. How do we kind of walk down that road?
First it starts with a standard, right? It's a specification. So we have to sort of ask ourselves, like, what's the expectation? So we have to develop like an internal open standard that we can basically use to guide developers for design requirements, and then we can apply that standard and observe our production environment and see the delta from where we are according to like an API specification. Some industries are really good at having sort of specified standards for API design, and others aren't. So it really starts with that documentation standard, and from there you sort of derive your delta from where you are to where you need to be.
All right. And I'm going to have you tag that to JJ in terms of what makes a secure API.
So let me clear my throat on there, but it starts with standards, to Carl's point, and it also helps with the engineers, right, of just working and breaking down silos, right? If you want to access to my data sets, leverage my APIs, and those are the things that I think Jeff Bezos made very popular, right, about leveraging APIs to make sure your platform and your business was extensible. But as far as to help secure it, once you're thinking about extensibility and the right access controls and enabling the business, you actually then can start applying the right the ACLs, right? The asset, what should be delivered. How do we actually handle the authorization for this? And so, having that standard internally now allows everyone to leverage the same published schema, to leverage the same Swagger documentation. And so, yes, we want to hide it from the bad guys, with some great advice there, but we also want a place to publish our APIs internally.
Also, hey, I like this 10% better tip that Dwayne throws out. And Carl, I'm interested to know, how often is this problem happening? He says often when you are using a version 2 API, the old version 1 API is still active and may expose risk to stable older API versions. Is that super common? Like the older version is still running?
Almost every organization has dormant or abandoned APIs. They're relatively easy to discover. They're relatively easy to shut off, but you got to be looking for them.
And this goes
you have
into
to
the
be able to,
asset inventory.
yeah, it's having like a living record of what's alive and what's supposed to be alive. And so, published APIs that need to be deprecated, they're pretty easy to discover, but pretty much everybody has them, and it's a really low hanging fruit when you start looking on the network and seeing what APIs are alive and not alive, and we need to shut them down.
All right, I want to go to this question, and I know this may be for some a kind of a dumb question asked, but I think it's a good question asked, and I think we should hit it. I'll start with you, JJ. How is API security different from general application security? And the wider team wants to know the answer to this.
I mean, I treat it as the same, right? And so,
Okay.
from how we actually apply it, the primitives that you're talking about, whether it's application security versus API security, it's within the name. It's an application programming interface within your API. Now, there are ways to, I would say, blow yourself up a bit with APIs because you can integrate with the data store. But when you start talking about sanitization, encoding, all these things are, the same requirements that you want from your application, whether it's from rate limiting. And so our approach, right, we might throw different scanners at it and we might fuzz it differently. But the same controls, whether it's OWASP top 10 as the wider team just posted in Slack, or the OWASP top 10 for APIs versus mobile versus application security, they are all derived from the same primitives. When we start talking about access controls or application filtering, that's my approach, right? It's once you start going into the more details about API, you can start layering in different test cases for API security, but it is one of those where treat all the same, because it's rising tide lifts all boats with security.
All right, I'm going to give you also an opportunity. I want you, Carl, to sort of explain what No Name is doing in the application security space. So before we go to our first game, give us a lowdown. Like we're talking about all these issues. Where have you found that No Name is playing critically right now?
Sure. So dropped in the chat the OWASP API top 10. So that's the 10 commandments. That's the gospel for API security risks. So what we do though is we look at those API top 10 risks and more, but we have to look at those during the development of an API. So we're testing during the development phases. We have to look at whether we're susceptible to those risks as a risk exposure. So potential, do we have those gaps in our environment, configurations and vulnerabilities? And then third, we need to evaluate and identify when an attacker is attempting to exploit those risks in progress right now, live on the wire. So it kind of comes down to this OWASP top 10 API, which is these are the things that can go wrong with an API. But it's not enough to just know the answer to that at one point in time. You have to know the answers to those questions as a security team throughout the whole life cycle of an API. And so that's what we're doing, is we're entooling an organization to build the capability from the time the developer first touches the keyboard all the way through the SOC alert at 2 a.m. on a Saturday, and really providing that control plane across the board.
Now, I'm sorry, JJ, do you work with No Name Security? I'm just wondering if you have a relationship with them.
Nope, we don't. Just good friends with Carl. So
that's good. That works for us too as well. All right, let me go to one of my questions out here. And please send in your questions. And if you haven't clicked on the button at the bottom of the screen to register for next week's DDoS Trends, which, by the way, is going to be a very interesting topic because there's going to be a report connected to that has some really interesting insights, please click on that and join us. So let's talk about common ways APIs are attacked. Let's get a couple answers here. We can follow it up more after our first game. But Carl, what are you seeing that are the most common ways that APIs are being attacked?
Well, let's go back to the API top 10 attacks. Number one, number two is exploiting authentication and authorization. So the trivial example is I log into my bank account using an authentic credential. I've got a JOT token that's authentic, but I one up the digit on my account number. And so when I request account balance, I receive somebody else's account information. So that's a break in the authorization of an API. And so that's that JJ mentioned. It's the business logic. And so it all comes down to the business logic in APIs. Authentication, authorization, business logic is pretty easy to exploit. Our independent researcher found 54 out of 55 mobile applications that she tested were susceptible to authorization and authentication abuse.
All right, let's come back to this. We're going to go into our whoops here. There we go. We're going to do our first game.
Do you know what others are thinking? On the public interest.
All right, I just played a round of this with both of our guests, an old round of it, and they only got a 2 out of 4 right. As I have said, we only have 12 bad ideas. Oh, that's disappointing. You usually have a lot worse. But hold it, I saw a lot of good ideas come in, Andrew. How many good ideas do we have so far? Interesting to know, because we have 3 good ideas. We have 12 bad ideas, 3 good ideas. I think our audience can do better than that. I want to see more bad ideas. I want to see more good ideas as well. Again, if you can beat good ideas or more good ideas than bad ideas, which we've never seen before, I'll be quite impressed. All right. I think everyone knows how to play this game. You can play along in the chat room. Here we go. All right. Most average monthly search queries, is it application, programming, or interface? What do you guys think? What do you think? A, B, or C?
I'm going with A, application.
I'm going to go with A as well, application.
All right. I think it was a good choice for A because the correct answer is yes, application, by a lot. By a lot. All right. Let's go to our next one. What do you think gets more queries, protocol or rules?
As a serial rule breaker, I'm going to go with E, rules.
E, rules. What do you say?
Definitely rules. It applies in so many aspects of life. Rules, E.
And what's the correct answer? Actually, I was surprised by this as well. Protocol. Protocol beats rules. I was completely surprised on that one. All right, so 1-1 for the two of you. Communications versus conversations. Which gets more queries, communications or conversations? What do you guys think?
I'm going to go with F, communications.
F, communications.
I'm going to follow Carl with that as well, F, communications.
All right, you're both going with communications. Let's see. Yes, communications. Very good. Okay. 2-2, I believe, is what you both have. All right, here's the last one. What gets more queries, API security or third-party security? What do you think?
JJ, you first.
All right, this is the toss-up. So, I'm going to go with third-party security.
All right.
I gotta go with the home team. H, API security.
That was a wise move. Yes. That totally surprised me. What a whopping difference that was right there. The API security. So Carl pulls it out 3-2, beating out JJ on this one. Good job.
Only rightfully so.
Good job on that. All right. I want to go back to how are you seeing APIs attacked? And is it the OWASP top 10, JJ?
I mean, it is. I think Dustin mentioned in the chat earlier about like pagination attacks, right? And we talk about rate limiting. It's part of the OWASP top 10 for APIs, and there's multiple ways of how to solve for that. And so there's places where you can solve at the gateway, and then there's application layer, logic for rate limiting. And so you want to actually do it in both places. It just helps with the layered security approach for that. But when we look at pagination attacks of just start, enumerating and scraping data, the APIs are there to help out with, data exposure and help your business to interact with other, services and third parties that you work with. But it could also be used, right? And could be used to steal data from you that you want to be public, but, within reason. And so you'll see a lot of those types of attacks where it's just constantly scraping, enumerating, and paginating your APIs to see what it could get out of it, create a big giant data store. And now they have it in aggregate. This is what we saw happen with LinkedIn, where someone was just slowly crawling LinkedIn and putting together a large database of all LinkedIn users.
Is that necessarily... And excuse my ignorance on that. Is that necessarily an API problem or just a scraping issue altogether?
Well, you could put the right rate limits in place. And so it's, in security, you could help every part of the business, right? So, we're okay with 10 users, being seen, but are we okay with the entirety of users being seen? Yeah. And so it ends up becoming, everything ends up becoming a security, challenge and a problem there. And so if you're having kind of tighter rate limits to prevent kind of these bots or these types of attacks where they're just going to scrape everything that you are exposing out to the public internet, uh, you are helping the business, or at least adding mud pits, if you will, for the attackers as they are enumerating it.
Carl, you're nodding your head. What do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just that to what JJ said, the pagination is a good example where an API is an asset, like any asset is, right? So there's layers of controls that protect an asset. There is its an inherent sort of secure nature, whether it's designed well or not, but there's also like the protective controls. So part of the equation in API security is, of course, to develop secure and well-designed APIs, but it is also to improve the control layers that we're relying on to protect APIs. So whether it's a web application firewall or an API gateway, those control points that protect APIs, they need to be reinforced as well to create sort of the layers of defense on an API.
By the way, the bad idea poll has just been posted, so please, everybody, get in there and vote for your favorite bad idea. Pick the worst one because we're going to be playing the Department of Yes with both Carl and JJ. And I see we have a question here. Hey, this is a good, interesting question. Oh, this is Phil Wilf is the wider team. By the way, he's clarified. So he is asking this question: are API security risks different by region? That's an interesting question. Have you seen that? Either of you? Regional API issues?
I think from a data exposure perspective, right? If I'm going to put on the CPRA hat, localization, conversations, they're going to be definitely PII relevant for different industries and different countries. So I think in regions, yes, they are things that you want to consider as part of what you're going to publish and how you're going to publish it. But it's still, I would say, it's an evergreen problem and challenge, to be clear, where when you start thinking about regions and what is the impact there from security, you're going to ask that for your API security, but also just from your business or from your application.
And Adam Geiser, I think that is, he asked the question, and would this fall under secrets management, or he asked, how would you prevent accidental key exposure? Carl?
Well, to be frank, there's always going to be human risk. The developers are going to have a lot of leeway to some degree. So key management programs, of course, but I think that where we kind of come into that answer the question is the continuous scanning and discovery. So if there's ever an exposure event, you can learn about that within seconds, rather than waiting for a security researcher or a data breach to learn that you had a key exposure. The security team should really be able to detect and remediate that almost in real time. So that creating the time component for us, I think, is really important as a security function, because when we can shrink the time it takes us to detect and remediate something, we take a lot of pressure off these sort of errors that humans can make.
And is that automated within Noname, or to some degree? How does that get handled?
Yeah, absolutely. So the automated looking at public repositories, Postman collections, think of those as like sort of off-network assets, and then like our runtime platform looking sort of internal to the environment. Just the continuous identification, searching, remediation of those, so that the security team can sort of sleep at night. That there can be minor control deficiencies, but we're still going to see it. We're going to catch it, and we're going to respond quickly.
And actually, I'm going to follow up with this question from Jeff, who says, why would you scan an API from the outside rather than analyzing the code, SAST, or using instrumentation? I asked. What do you think?
I think you do all of the above. But I think an important factor, so it takes SAST, for example, or IAST, the testing that you do pre-production may not involve a production environment variable that you can test effectively from an outside as like a penetration test or a production type of test. So, for example, if the API gateway is misconfigured, if that testing variable was not in the sort of at the early stages of testing, then your API in production is not it's not in the same context as it was the first time it was tested. So you have to do all of the above. I think all of them are good.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I mean, this goes to the beginning of your answer. I mean, goes into anything in security. You said, when I asked you about key management, yeah, have key management, but you got to scan that thing all the time. You wouldn't just have key management and hope nothing's ever stolen ever, because when does that happen, JJ? Never.
Never.
So one of the things that I had discovered, I had written about API security over 2 years ago myself, and I was just shocked at all the different sort of angles and issues that come into play with securing your APIs. I'm going to go back into an earlier question somebody asked, or Dustin asked this question of, what don't people know? So I want to dig a layer deeper. Like, what has been, let me ask you, a surprise for you in API security that you didn't know a few years ago? JJ.
I think the surprise is that let me noodle on this a bit. I'm going to pass.
All right, I'll go to Carl. Noodle,
yeah.
Carl. Give me it.
Yep.
What's the surprise?
I think I just mentioned this briefly, but as I've learned over the years about API security, I thought about this from the perspective of like the runtime API threat management sort of context. Meanwhile, there's this whole thing that for me has emerged in the last 6 to 12 months, which is the public code repos, Postman collections, these sort of open source and publicly available repositories. That's where the developers are working, and that's where the keys are at. That's where the source code's at. And that's not the production side, but we're seeing a lot of like data leakage, data breach events, where it's the sort of the API sort of design pattern, those flaws happening on the Postman collections. That's something that I've only recently learned about.
Okay. Are we coming back to your noodle, or are we skipping your noodle, JJ?
No, I mean, I can noodle a bit on this more, but I think the things that surprised me are just, we know, and this is, again, I think evergreen, we know the right controls to put in place, and we're seeing it. And there's a bunch of products here to help us out with API gateways and help with the concentration of the attack surface, right, to consolidate this. But we're still running into the same kind of historical problems that we've always run into within security. And so I think it's not something that I've learned over the last 6 months, but it's kind of it's a little bit of the game of hot potato, right? What is hot in the hopper right now? When we look at APIs, you're exposing a lot more of your business logic out to the public.
Yeah.
I think Carl was also using the conversation that this is part of the digital transformation. And so as we're seeing the large digital transformation for a lot of companies, leverage and extend their business out to the public within reason, right, with the appropriate access controls, you're now just seeing the same issues that we ran into with ACL issues or object level controls. And so I think we're relearning how to walk again when we think about API security.
All right. Hey, everybody, the chat room just went dormant for a couple of minutes there. Guys, wake up in there, and let's throw out some more questions here, please, for our guests. And by the way, if you haven't registered for next week, go ahead and do that. And remember to stick around for our meetup at the end of the hour, because that link will change to our meetup link as well. All right. Let's talk about developers. This was going to the question of application security versus API security. What can we do to better equip our developers? I'm going to throw this to you, JJ, first. And we always talk about shift left and doing more scanning and things like that. What can we do to help the developers out more?
I mean, it's writing better rule sets, right? Helping them create tooling, whether it's linters, leveraging SemGrip, giving them the comfort and guardrails so that they could do their job efficient without stressing about security. And so we talk about shift left, or we talk about SecDevOps.
So, I'm sorry, you glossed over. Can you go back to, you were mentioning some of the guardrails. Walk me through some of the guardrails.
So, linters for your IDE, right? And there's a bunch of products out there of, hey, we want to actually use SemGrip, or we want to actually use static code analysis, as I forgot who mentioned it. Jeff mentioned it inside the chat. And so when we start thinking about static application security testing, there's hey, out of the box, I could do SaaS API scanning. And that's great, but it's not relevant to the language that I'm using, or it's not relevant to any of the functions or dependencies that the team is using. And so what we're doing, and how my approach is, make it custom for the developers, make it feel that you are empathetic and understand truly what their flow is, and don't ask them to do anything that is unnatural to them. And so that's really kind of the approach about how to enable the developers is meet them where they are in their IDE, meet them where they are in QA and development. Let them leverage the tools as part of their normal tool chains and not think about, well, actually, I need to stress about security, right? We as security professionals stress enough about it, and there's not enough time of the day. The last thing to do is just pass it a bit. So that's kind of the approach that I would say from developers, that give them the right tooling to be successful. Those are the guardrails that allows them to, we are doing a check. Hey, are you actually using this library that has appropriate and approved updated patches, and the access controls that we agree with?
And by the way, let me say this: we have. I'm going to throw this out to our audience as well. I'm interested to know from our audience what they've had success with their development team in terms of improving the API security issue, but also is the inventory issue, like what Carl was saying at the very beginning, is that your number one bugaboo? Because I got to think it is, because every time we talk about this kind of stuff, not just with APIs, but it always come back to what the friggin' hell do we have? Because no one feels confident about it. Do you find that with your own customers too, Carl? Like that's the number one sort of point of anxiety?
Yes, and the first time when I was a customer, and you see this when we do readouts with our customers now, is the first time a security team or an API center of excellence team, the dev team, sees that inventory the first time, it's kind of a sigh of relief, because everybody sort of has this nagging question in the back of their head: is do I have shadow, dormant, rogue, ancient APIs running around? And at least you get that answer, and that answer might not be good news, but it's a lot better.
It's better
than
to know than not
unknown.
know.
Yep.
All right. We are. It is not time for Department of Yes. We're playing Department of Yes at 40 minutes past the hour, but we can play Department of Yes now if you'd like to. We're 31 minutes past the hour. Don't we? I have it in my schedule that we were playing it at 40 minutes past the hour. Hang tight, Andrew. No, yes, we're doing it then. We're going to do it then. So we're 9 minutes away from the Department of Yes. We'll come back to that. That means, everybody, you can get in there and vote for the bad ideas if you have not done that already. We have a back channel. That's why I'm chatting off to the side here, where my producer, Andrew, who's working in the back. Aaron is on vacation off in Paris right now, but so Andrew's producing the back right now. So we have some runaway winners, but let's see. Go in there and tell me if somebody else has a far worse idea. As that actually, we might start this a little early. Might see if we can bring some people on if you want. Again, if you want to come on, let me know by typing "bring me on" as well. All right, I got some more questions, and excuse me. Before I go to my own questions, I'll go to your questions. Dustin asked another one. Should companies be willing to make their API formulas more transparent to trusted customers? I'm going to start with you on Carl. What do you think about that?
It would be presumptuous to know any particular situation, but I'd say that there's a step short of that, which is you should make, for example, demonstrating that your APIs are secure tested as part of like a customer relationship. So, like, for example, when we most of us in security, when we engage with our third parties, we ask for their pen tests, right? We're almost never asking for that on APIs, and so let's just start asking for like validation that the APIs that we're conducting business with have been tested and validated accordingly. And so I'd say just having that is a major step forward. And then if it's like a significant strategic business relationship, sure, then maybe you're going to go that next step further and really get into the nuts and bolts of an API.
That's a really good point that we have not brought up. JJ, what are things that a partner could do on their side of the API to really screw things up for you, and that you've actually seen?
I mean, not publish any, right? I think there's plenty of third parties. There's a conversation about third party APIs. There's places where there's companies that are just not publishing in their APIs, and so using RPA, IPA, and you're using building your own internal API as a wrapper to kind of stick a few things together. And I think that's probably the worst thing a partner could do, is just not expose and give me the tools to be successful in integrating with you and working with you.
And I'm assuming, that's happened before, and you put the pressure on them. Can you open up a darn API? And does it eventually happen?
Yeah, I mean, eventually, but it's the company's DNA and culture, right? They're not gonna be able to take this fat client, if you will, that connects to their cloud data store, to eventually start exposing APIs, and so that's where we kind of start running into some struggles. And there's the external API that we provide, for our customers that use our platform, and then there's the internal APIs that we develop for ourselves for the business. And when we start thinking about enumerating those, attack surfaces, they're just two different problems to be solved for. One, you might have a very, straightforward published gateway, and then internally there's a scattershot, an ink blot of constant different APIs that internal teams are publishing for themselves. And so those are just things that you're going to have to kind of tackle. Like API security is a, outside in and inside out, challenge to be solved for everyone.
All right. We're gonna start in about a minute or two. I want to do one more question before we actually go to our game. Oh, this is a good question. Um, David pays his employees in hopes and dreams. No, it does not work like that at all, Dustin. What are methods we've used that don't work? What has worked? What are we missing? Okay, so let's just start with my first question here. What are methods to secure APIs that may have used in the past that simply are not working right now? Carl, what do you think?
Well, it's a web application firewall, and a WAF is a useful defense, but it really only accounts for a couple of the API top 10 risks. So I think that WAFs are good. Like WAFs work to defend against certain API attacks, but I think that there's a false sense of security that they are a catch-all for API protections, and so that's a web application firewall. That's what we used to lean on.
All right. Here, let's go to our first game or next game. What am I saying? Oh, it's called.
Hello, welcome to the Department of Yes, where no request is ever rejected.
All right, Andrew, I'm going to ask you to look this one up, or audience, you can chime in. We have some horrible suggestions here on how to protect API security, and or how to secure APIs. That's what I'm going to say. And you have to agree to these, both of you, and not be facetious, and explain why you want to deploy this incredibly stupid idea. So you have to find the silver lining. And so here's the first one. This one's got the most votes, hands down. Don't worry about the open source libraries your API rely on. APIs are immune from CVEs and 0 days. Why do you actually want to do that? And do you believe that APIs are immune from CVEs and 0 days? That is Jeff, supposedly had submitted that one. All right, I'm starting with you, Carl.
Go ahead, Carl.
Well, he's Jeff's spot on. An API isn't susceptible to industry-wide 0 days. It's susceptible only to a 0 days specifically that are unique to that snowflake of an API. Yeah! So he's absolutely right.
All right. I'm throwing this to you, JJ. Why are you not worrying about the open source libraries your API rely on?
Well, Carl stole my answer, so that's going to be a little bit tough one there. But so you could boo me now. But as far as
keep going.
But to Carl's point, they may be susceptible to those 0 days. The silver lining is that, yes, that dependency, if you look at J for what's called log4j, right, and the Java issue might have been part of your SBOM, right, and that's kind of the buzzword of these days. But you're actually not even using that service, and so there is a silver lining. Hey, we're not going to patch it, but guess what? We're not actually using that function, and I could sleep at night knowing that actual call and that function is not in use within our code base.
Sir, yes, sir. Just turn it off. I like that. All right, let's go to our next one. That was Jeff. Kudos to you, Jeff. Here you go. I'm going to start with you on this one, JJ, and I don't know who did this. Create an API that queries your APIs. Why do you want to do this, JJ?
I don't know if someone on the team has submitted that one, but we use a service, and it's an API to help enumerate and crawl our Swagger docs. And so if you are leveraging your APIs to secure your APIs, you're all in. And so you're within the the four walls there. And so there is hope that because you're building an API as a security team, you're going to learn and identify the problems and the pitfalls that exist with creating APIs. And so that's kind of the silver lining.
I like that. Now, I don't think this is by Dustin Sachs submitted this one. I don't think this is so awful because I don't know if you're creating an API to query your other APIs, but you are querying APIs, and why not have an API that's querying other APIs? What do you think, Carl?
Totally redundant. All of your APIs are already active. All you have to do is listen. So you don't need to develop a new API to query, to inventory, test, because
Are
your
you telling me
traffic already
that
gives you
Dustin
that answer.
Sachs' idea is no good? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's a fine idea, but I'm a firm no on this one because it's redundant.
It's a firm no.
Yep.
Well, then you have to.
Yep.
No, it can be redundant, but we're still going to do it. We're going to create busy work for ourselves. That's what we're going to do. All right. I'm sorry you lost that last one. JJ takes that last one there. JJ's for that one. But yes, yes, it is redundant, but we're just going to do extra busy work. Part of the bad ideas is doing busy work for no purpose whatsoever. You're not supposed to point out what makes the idea bad. It's called the Department of, yes, we're supposed to point out why we want to do this stupid idea.
Boo, Carl.
Boo.
Carl,
Carl.
Give your team a chance to write an API. What do
Great
you
idea.
think? There you go.
Great practice for training for learning APIs.
I give that to myself. All right, let's get into this. No questions, guys. Get in your questions. I'm going to go back to my own list. Some of these. I'm going to say that one of the classic that I keep hearing classic API security mistakes is going back to this. The loss of secrets, and also like what we were saying before, just open APIs that should not be open. Let me isolate secrets. Open APIs should not be open, and then just people getting authentication information they should not be getting access to. Am I hitting the big three here, JJ?
Carl said, listen, and I think,
and I know we have the
yeah.
OWASP top 10. I'm sorry, but go on.
But I would when you start looking at those problems, whether it's stolen credentials, bad authentication, bad ACLs, if you start listening and start looking at how your APIs are interacting within the external parties or even with internally themselves, right? And you're not actually going after the enumeration and fuzzing, right? The outside in, where you're looking at how they are interacting internally, you actually start looking at normal patterns, right? Because these are computers, right, or humans interacting with it. They have normal patterns. And so when you look at the old APIs that we have a very hard time deprecating and sunsetting, it could be an application, a service. Everyone just historically deals with those problems. If you actually start looking at how they are interacting and start building in controls, hey, we know that this should get pinged once a day, because there's just a cron service that's highly reliant on this API that we can't move over. Build your controls around that from a detective control to identify if those are anomalistic actions taking place on the API. So when you're looking at that of all three, I don't want to kind of get that yes for Carl back, but this will help out with securing your environment, because you're just passively listening and building out a model of what is normal.
All right, hold it. Do we have our 10% poll? Can you put that up, Andrew? Get the 10% poll. We just have, you can actually bring the best bad idea poll down and throw the 10% poll up. There it is. We have the 10% poll. Only 4 great ideas. Please vote on them. It won't take you long to run through them at all. All right. Dwayne Gran actually is a great question, and I'm throwing this one directly at you, Carl. And your answer to this is going to be the big pitch that's going to be able to sell No Name into everybody's company. Here you go. It's really hard, says Dwayne, to get budget support for security APIs when most people in senior leadership don't know what they are. Is there a good analogy that you can suggest that would help explain to non-technical business leaders what an API is and why it needs to be secured? Great question, Dwayne. Here it is. I'm setting you up, Carl. This is going to be the great analogy. We're all going to take it and throw it to our next senior management or board meeting. Give it to us. Go.
Uh, Replace the word API in your business case with revenue stream. So if you're a company who's creating products and services that are delivered via API, whether it's financial transactions or geolocational data or a pricing algorithm, that is a revenue stream for your business. And so securing APIs is securing the revenue generating engine for the organization. And so when you talk to a CFO or a line of business head about their streams of revenue and creating integrity and quality in that stream of revenue, their ears perk up and they care about that. They care about the integrity of that revenue stream, its predictability, its reliability, its quality. And so that's how we take an API security message and put it in front of a business executive where they will viscerally understand, like, my revenue generating stream is dependent on the integrity of this avenue.
That is a great analogy. Substitute API with revenue stream, and that pretty much nails it on the head. Would you agree with that analogy, JJ?
I do. I think the one tweak there is kind of the velocity, right? So there's the revenue aspect from a P&L, and then there's also the reducing cost and efficiency and improving efficiency. And so by leveraging APIs, you now are allowed to enumerate and iterate faster from your product. You're allowed to change the front end and solve for problems that are just more nimble when you're leveraging these APIs. And so every business leader wants to understand, well, you're going to reduce costs for me about how we actually operate the business, help me generate more revenue, to Carl's point, and then 3, give me the flexibility to kind of bend and flex within any business or any kind of macro or micro environments that you're dealing with.
Very, very good point. All right. We are close to wrapping up our show. We actually got about 13 more minutes left here. So let me do this. Get your questions in right now. Actually, I'm going to go through some of the good ideas. Oh, hey, have a third-party tester validate your APIs are in fact properly configured and secured. Does no-name security do something like that? Carl?
Absolutely. So what we do is really testing automation. So we can automatically generate documentation for every API in the production environment or what's in your code repo and apply like a whole battery of sophisticated tests for that API. It still is a good idea to bring in humans to test the crown jewels. Like, it doesn't replace a pen tester, but what you can do is you can provide an overwhelmingly fast and automatic testing capability across a whole API footprint with our active testing platform.
And going back to your analogy of revenue streams, yes, you want to automate to make sure your revenue streams are clean because you can't literally look at every friggin' transaction that's happening. But don't 100% always count on it. Like, do a little manual test here and there. It's like why we test our backups. Like, yes, we get the reports from our backups that everything's working, but why not actually take a look and see if you can restore a file? JJ, agree with this?
I do, and I think if you look at testing APIs, it's not one user, right? There may be 40 different roles that are associated with 20 different, with a different, hundreds of different permissions associated to it, and so you're going to have to test user A, B, C, 3. For a human, you could do some of it, but leveraging kind of automated tests that helps you scale and that helps improve kind of the validation and continuous verification that you want with APIs.
All right. Sorry, just about to sneeze there. All right. This one, I believe, came in from Dustin Sachs. And we talked about this, or Carl, I think you spoke about this early on. Align your API security to the frameworks that your company chooses to leverage. Could you dig down a level and explain what that specifically means?
Frameworks. Can you repeat that question one more time, David?
Well, it's not a question. It's one of his 10% better tips.
Okay.
And this is one of the second one most voted up. Align your API security to the frameworks that your company chooses to leverage. So what does that mean? Aligning the security to the frameworks.
Yeah, I'd say they're kind of like two levels of frameworks. So the first framework would be something like FHIR, FHIR, which is a sort of a healthcare insurance standard. So you can automate compliance checks with a standard in that level. And open banking standards, for example, those are specifications that you can evaluate, compliance and standardization. That more abstract layer would be like the NIST CSF kind of model. And so at that layer of abstraction, that framework, I would suggest the best available option is the OWASP Software Assurance Maturity Model, the SAM. So we have a remix of SAM that we've created for API security, which is really a risk and controls framework for API security. It's inspired by OWASP's SAM model specifically for APIs, but I'd say that that's a really useful framework that applies industry agnostic to looking at like a commonly accepted framework to evaluating an API security footprint.
All right, hang tight for just a second. I am going to wrap this show up with a couple of last comments here. If you have not clicked the link at the bottom of the screen to register for next week, please do that right now because it's going to change in just about 1 minute. Please do that now and register for next week's Super Cyber Friday. Remember, if you do that, you are automatically registered to win an awesome CISO Series jacket as well. So do that because if you do it by Tuesday, you're registered. If you register after Tuesday, guess what? You're not entered into the raffle. All right. Huge thanks to your company, Carl, No Name Security, for sponsoring this very Super Cyber Friday event. We greatly appreciate it. All right. Now, also, starting in 90 minutes from now, we will be doing our Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review show with Will Gregorian, who's a former Senior Director of Technology Operations and Security over at Rhino. That is not on this platform, but is on our CISO Series YouTube channel. Essentially, just go to youtube.com/CISO Series, and you will find us there. That's exactly where we are. Now, Andrew, can you change that link at the bottom of the screen to our meetup? I want that to be our meetup link as well. That our meetup, when that changes, stick around for our meetup. Click the link at the bottom when it changes, although you can still change to this. Now it is. It's changed. You can click it now, even though we're still in the show right now. We still actually have 9 more minutes left in our show. You can click, just have that window open, so when this all ends, you can jump into that as well. Now, Larry Rosen, we have to thank because he's the one who gave us that first great tip about third-party verification. So thank you very much, Larry. I did not call you out on that. So thank you on that. Tell your friends to join us. We do this every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. And also, and I'll get to the question about documentation in just a second. Let me put that out. And then if you want to sponsor Super Cyber Friday, email me at david@cisoseries.com. We got 2 left for sponsorship in 2022. All right. Where is this question about documentation? I'm looking for it. Carl, where are you seeing this? I don't see it in the questions there. Was it in the chat window?
Wider team about the API inventory. Is it useful for?
Oh, yeah. I wonder if a freshly scanned API inventory is useful for non-security purposes like ops, production, et cetera. That is a good question. What you say with that? And that wider team, by the way, that is, why am I blanking out? He just answered.
Jeff.
Hold on, wait. No, not Jeff. It is, hold on. It is Phil Wolf. I'm sorry, Phil Wolf. That's it. That's his company is wider team. I'm sorry. Go back to answering that. Hey, is this API inventory useful to anybody else?
100%. Phil, that's like a cheat code for the security team to become like an enterprise architecture and app development team's best friend. Because when you capture an inventory, then you can create automatically the documentation for all of those APIs. And so now I have a live runtime documentation library that architecture application teams can do a diff and a delta. So what's running, what did I think was running, or what's in the repository of documentation. So security team can be the best friend of an app dev team by possessing this sort of authoritative source of documentation that comes from an inventory.
Have you done this yourself, JJ?
Yes. I mean, countless of times where I go to the IT team or go to the development team. Hey, show me what assets you have. They give me the 12, 13, and then they go, actually, it's 40 something. Mm-hmm. And they, you don't want to, you're not going into that conversation to stump them, but you're going to that conversation to make sure that we, parity of what we understand and, collaborating with it. And once they actually see that security could enable them to get better insights, to get better visibility, there's nothing better from a culture shift when you're actually doing that and enabling your technology team, your engineers and developers to say, actually, I want to use this security tool to make better decisions. And they're not even thinking about it as a security tool. They're just thinking of it as a tool that's a must-have for them to do their job.
Excellent point. All right, so let me, as we're wrapping up, Carl, you are hiring, yes?
Absolutely.
And so if you want to work with Carl, contact through LinkedIn, but also Carl will be joining us over in just a few minutes over at the Toucan meetup portion of our show, which is that link at the bottom of the screen I'm pointing to right now. Can everyone see me pointing to that link right there? You're actually, depending, I don't know if I'm on the left side of my screen. I might be on the center or the right on other people. Everyone's sort of mixed on a different side of the screen, depending what you see. But click that link. Carl will be there. Many people have been hired. Dustin Sachs is a perfect example of somebody who's been hired because of the meetups here on this very, very show. And I'm assuming you are also hiring, JJ, yes?
Yes, but for within India. So we're hiring and expanding out our IDC team within for Compass.
We do have people from India that join us, so that's also good to know as well. But also, if you're interested in no-name security in general, because best analogy you've heard today, revenue stream, love it. That everyone can give Carl credit when you go into your next meeting and use revenue stream for that. All right, I'm going to start with you, JJ. Any last thoughts on this topic right now? And also, if they want to connect with you, work at Compass. By the way, we bought our house using Compass, our last one, so I can say that their product is good. JJ?
Well, I appreciate there's a ton of APIs to help kind of connect 60 plus applications that we built internally to support kind of the quote to close for a real estate transaction. But I think going back to that frameworks conversation,
Yes.
whether it's SAM, CSF, there's BSIM, those help distill it so people understand kind of the potential qualitative or quantitative disparities that you might have from the controls, but also just let's level set, right? Yes, it's API, it's software security, it's how we handle our data stores. Let's leverage a common language, and that's what's really helpful from those frameworks, right? When everyone's speaking the same language, when we say it's 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5, we're not trying to grok what that truly means. We have a baseline that we all understand, and so I can't. While frameworks as an engineer, no one likes the idea of the C word of compliant or hey, we're going to do the standard or framework. But do not hesitate to lean in there. But know that it can be abused, just like anything in security. So use it wisely to help you and your program moving forward.
All right, good advice. All right, Carl, last advice here, getting connected with you and how they can explore no-name security themselves if they're interested.
Sure. So as JJ talked about frameworks, so software assurance maturity models, those give like department leaders like the big picture of their API security risk. That's what I do with our customers. So Carl M at nonamesecurity.com.
He spelled it with a K.
Carl with a K, M. And then for individual practitioners, we have the API security workshop, and that is really like a 3-hour boot camp where you attack and defend in a live fire environment. It's a learning environment, and that's how like individual people really get comfortable with the geometry of API security. And it's good for CPE hours, for your CISSP certification, and all that stuff.
You don't need to be a customer no name to do this.
Nope. It's an open training course. nonamesecurity.com/workshop. So individuals, everybody can take that class anytime. We'd love to have people join.
Yeah, I'm typing it in. /work. Okay, so you know what? We're gonna wrap this up just like a minute and a half early. I want to thank our audience for joining us. Please click the link on the bottom to join us in the meetup portion of the show. Huge thanks to my guests, both Carl Mattson, who's the CISO over No Name Security, and also JJ Aga, who's the CISO over at Compass. We greatly appreciate it. Everybody, click that link at the bottom of the screen. Join us. If you did not click the link to register for next week, because not everybody of you have registered for next week, you can always go to our events page and find it right there. But soon it'll actually be on the front page as well. Thank you, everybody.